Hey guys, Chris here. Tonight we have a very frightening and creepy story about this couple that goes to Northern Vermont to spend a few days at this cabin in the forest. And what happens there is so frightening for them that they have a hard time believing that it even happened to them. That's next. So not only is tonight's story really frightening, it's really creepy, which is very fitting for tonight's beer, which is called Hop Show 2. And that is based on the old Creepshow comics. You guys remember those? Stephen King wrote the original Creepshow movie, and there was like 3 Creepshow movies in the 80s. But this is a double dry hopped, double hazy India Pale Ale. Say that 7 times fast, or even 1 time fast. And that is a 16-ounce beer, so that is going to be more than enough beer for one night. Oh, there we go. Hop Show 2. There we go. Cheers, or creeps. So our story starts out in New York City. A young couple, Mark and Jenny. Mark had just learned that his grandfather had passed away and his parents lived in Florida, so he took it upon himself to go up to his grandfather's small home in Northern Vermont and help settle the estate. It was spring and Jenny decided to go along as well. Thought it'd be nice to get out of the city, take a drive through the country and spend some time, a few days up in northeastern Vermont. It was the year 2008. They're on this trip up there. They're heading to Concord, Vermont, just outside of there, near the Moose River. Deciduous forests and pine trees, a few open meadows, hills, really beautiful country, very picturesque country. They get to this house, 2-bedroom, 1 bath, pretty small home, older home. Everything looked pretty much in order until they walked inside this small home. They noticed that the house was in somewhat disarray and there was buckets sitting on the floor in the kitchen, 3 of them, and then throughout the house there was buckets in other rooms as well. And above the buckets was holes in the ceiling. Then Mark said they almost looked like bullet holes. But they couldn't be. This is crazy. Mark thought, this is really odd because my grandfather was a very orderly man and he had me work for him and help out with things in the summer while Mark was up there. And it just seemed really odd that his grandfather was behaving in this way. They also noticed that there was knives and sharp objects like scissors on the kitchen counters and throughout the house, on the nightstand and some tables in the other room. Like he had weapons waiting for him, available in each room if he needed them. And Mark thought, he's acting like a paranoid man. This is really strange. And they were both thinking, did his grandfather lose his mind? And if he did, why was he shooting at in the ceiling, and what was he shooting at, if anything? Jenny also mentioned that she didn't believe in the paranormal and things like that, but she felt this strange energy as soon as they pulled up to this house, and certainly after they went inside and discovered what they did. So they both knew there weren't many options for lodging in the area, so they decided to spend the night. Jenny didn't feel comfortable with it, but she relinquished, just wanting to kind of get this job done. And it was a normal night. They kind of got settled in, took care of a few things. went to bed, and about an hour after they went to bed, Jenny woke up and she saw Mark standing by the window in the dark. He was like a silhouette looking out the window. And she said, "Honey, is everything okay? What's going on?" And he said, "It's fine, everything's fine." And she knew something was up, and she said, "Honey, what are you looking at?" And he said, "I thought I heard somebody walking by just a minute ago." And she said, "Do you see anything?" And he said, "No, I don't see anything. I haven't heard anything since." And so she felt comfortable enough to go back to sleep. He's a very athletic built guy, very confident guy, very strong man. And so she said, "Let's just go back to bed. I think we're fine." And they went back to bed. They woke about a half hour later, and they heard this loud commotion on the roof of the house. It sounded like, and this is what Jenny said, it sounded like some construction workers working on the roof and some dogs or animals running around them. Just crazy, just this loud commotion. They're sitting there looking at each other in the dark, listening to this, and then Mark turns on the light, and they both look up at the ceiling. They can see dust coming down from the ceiling from the vibration of whatever is going on up on the roof. And they were really confused about what was going on outside and up on the roof there. Just this commotion, really loud commotion on the roof of the house. Then Jenny remembered all the sharp objects and the knives throughout the house on the nightstands, tables, counters, and she thought maybe Mark's grandfather wasn't crazy after all. Maybe there was something really serious to be dealt with that he was dealing with. Mark got up and he wanted to do something, so he went out of the bedroom, down the hall, and into the hall closet, and he got a broom, came back, and he started hitting the ceiling with it as hard as he could without breaking the sheetrock. And it was quiet just for a moment, and they heard this high-pitched scream howl coming from the roof. And it was totally disorienting to them. Just shook them up, totally startled. They're sitting there in bed, and they just heard this loud sound. It just reverberated through their bodies. And Mark again felt like he needed to do something. So he gets out of bed, walks around the end of the bed, goes to the window, and he looks out. Looks out the window. Turns around and he comes back, and he's got this legitimate look of fear and terror in his eyes. And Jenny was hoping, expecting some kind of an answer that, maybe there's raccoons or some animals up on the roof. And obviously he couldn't see up on the roof, but he saw something outside. It was quiet again. And then they both heard this like sniffing sound in the vent, like an intake vent in the ceiling. This was an old house. And they both thought whatever this was trying to figure out what they were, like smelling them. Jenny was so freaked out by this. She was under the covers. She was uncontrollably shaking, hoping Mark would do something. Mark walked across the room. Jenny didn't hear it. He touched her on the shoulder to comfort her, and she nearly jumped out of her skin. Mark said, "I think we need to make a run for the car. Everything's going to be okay." But there was like this trembling in his voice, and he was definitely distraught about what was happening. And Mark was, again, this athletic build, confident, big guy, and he was just overwhelmed. Just then they heard something in the living room, and it was at the front door. They heard the door handle turning and jiggling. Jenny was so grateful that she had locked the front door, and she said out loud to Mark, "We have to call the police. Now." They're both sitting there in silence listening to this for about a minute, and then Mark had had enough. He gets up and he decides, I gotta find this gun that my grandfather had. Has to be in the hall closet or the kitchen closet or something. So he gets up and he goes down the hallway. Jenny's sitting by herself in the bed, and she's thinking, I gotta be with Mark. So she gets up and she quickly goes down the hallway to find Mark. He's standing in the kitchen and he's staring at something outside, and whatever it is staring back at Mark. So Jenny looks out the window and she sees what she thinks is this tall, hairy, naked man looking back at them. And she can see his face, and he's got these wide set eyes, this tall forehead with his brow, big broad shoulders, and his hands are on either side of the window, and he's so tall he's looking down through the window at them. They can see his chest slowly moving in and out as it inhales and exhales. And his eyes were following Mark, and then they would slowly move over to Jenny and then back to Mark. They were both frozen with fear. This feeling that if there's a large predator, that if you do things too quickly or too slowly, it could be trouble for you, and you have to do things just right. Mark knew he needed to do something. So he slowly reached his hand over to the counter, the kitchen counter next to him, for this knife, and he could see the eyes on the Sasquatch follow his hand and then follow it back to him. Jenny also knew she needed to do something. She knew the phone was right behind her, and she reached back. This landline that was on the wall with the old push buttons, picks up the phone, and she had this really hard time aiming her fingers to get 911. She fortunately got through, and she heard, "What's your emergency? What's your emergency?" And all she could think of was intruders. Intruders. We have intruders trying to get into the house. We need help. So the last thing Jenny remembers was again hearing this high-pitched scream howl from just outside the kitchen window. And then she remembers being helped up off the kitchen floor by a police officer. She had passed out. And she immediately said, "Did you see them? Did you see them? They were just there, outside. There was one just outside." And the police officer said, "No, ma'am, we didn't see anyone. We didn't see any intruders." The police officer helped Jenny out of the kitchen into the living room, where Mark was seated with another police officer who was taking notes. And Mark was visibly shaken, and he was trembling. His hands were trembling. And all he could say was, they were large, they were trying to get in the house, and they were dangerous. They were very aggressive. So the police officers made a standard report. They didn't find any evidence. They thought the couple experienced something, they just didn't know what. Mark and Jenny obviously left at that time. And later, they both felt like what happened that night was so horrific, maybe it didn't even happen. It was like their minds didn't want to deal with it because it was just so out of the ordinary for them. Jenny also mentioned that she believed these creatures were not totally animals, but they were people of the forest. And that is our story for tonight. Wow, that was a creepy one. Was that not creepy or what? Talk about creep show. Wow. But thank you guys for watching. We are going to be getting out. Spring is coming. It's February now. I'm really excited. There's a lot of things I want to do. So hang with me, please. We'll get there. We'll be getting out of the studio here. But it's nice having the studio. It was really windy today. So very windy for me and my lanterns and my cameras and everything else. So thanks for watching. I always appreciate you guys' comments. Great comments. What a great community we have here. And we're going to be doing some good outdoor stuff coming up, as well as spooky stories, scary stories, frightening encounters, whatever. It should be fun. So thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. As always, keep hiking.